Thank you for joining me, everybody. This is an awesome room. I feel like this is the beginning of an epic movie, but it's the beginning of a story that I've only really just kind of started talking about very recently. And as you can see from the title of my talk, Crypto Heist, this is the aftermath of a government website cryptojacking attack. And I'll explain what cryptojacking is for those that are unfamiliar. But this story and me kind of uncovering and investigating this pretty significant cyber attack all started by accident. So this was not something that I set out to find or something that I intended to find and investigate. And it all started with a tweet from a friend of mine. He actually sent me a direct message. I still call it Twitter, I still call it tweet. And it was a Sunday morning in the UK, and I received a DM from a friend of mine, a good friend called Ian. And he's like, hey, Scott, do you have a second? I've just gone to the government's website. So I'll show you this in just a moment, but this is the ICO in the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office. So they're our data privacy watchdog for the UK government. And he's like, hey, I'm such a cool person. I was reading about privacy legislation on a Sunday morning, and my antivirus program popped up this warning here in the top right. And it says, warning, you're visiting a web page with a virus on it. And he was like, well, hang on a minute. I'm on a government website. This can't be right. It's like, please, could you go and take a look at this and see, is this correct? Is this real? Is there a virus running on this government website? So this was the larger version of the screenshot he sent me. And as you can see up there in the top right, he's definitely getting a pretty serious alert from his antivirus program. He's definitely saying, hey, like there is something bad on this page. I looked at the domain. It is the official domain for the ICO in the UK. He wasn't on some kind of like pretend, phishing or impersonation site. And I was like, okay, yeah, at first glance, this looks pretty serious. Now, the unfortunate thing here was I kind of very quickly verified this myself. I go to the page, obviously spin up a VM. Don't do this. If you think a page has a virus, don't just go there straight on your main computer. So I quickly spin up a VM, fire up a browser, go to the page and start looking through the source of the page to see if the thing that the antivirus program was reporting was on the page. And I'm like, wow, yeah. So I do see it in the source of the page, this JavaScript file that's being reported as malicious. So yeah, I was like, they actually have Coinhive running on their homepage. And this was the thing that the antivirus program was warning about. So for those unfamiliar with Coinhive, Coinhive was, I guess you could call it a product. It was a thing that was launched, and they had a very kind of specific mission for their product. And the idea was, we don't like advertisements on websites. We don't like the fact that they impact performance, they're privacy invasive, they're really no good. So Coinhive came up with this idea where you could take their JavaScript library and you could drop it onto your page. And then when visitors visit your site, the library will spin up and it will start mining Monero. It will start mining cryptocurrency. So whilst your visitors are browsing your page, you're borrowing some of their CPU to mine a little bit of cryptocurrency. And that would substitute those privacy invasive, performance impacting adverts. Now that was their stated mission. But what we often found was that this is not how they were actually used. This phrase was coined, cryptojacking, which was, if I could take the Coinhive library and instead of installing it on my site for my visitors, I could install it somehow on your site for your visitors, then all of your visitors would start mining cryptocurrency and they would send it to me instead. And this is how the phrase cryptojacking was born. This idea where if you can kind of enslave the visitors to other websites to mine cryptocurrency for you, obviously, the bigger websites you get this on and the more websites you get this on, the more people will be mining cryptocurrency for you. And this was really kind of what made Coinhive very prominent. I disagree slightly with their mission. I'm not entirely sure that, even if this was used as intended, I might have some discomfort with how it works and how you would convey this to users. So, if we put those aside for a moment, that really wasn't what happened anyway. The biggest thing that happened was this phrase that was coined, which was cryptojacking. Now, I think Coinhive rose to fame a little bit too quickly, and they were kind of almost a flash in the pan. For a few years there, they were really, really popular for all of the wrong reasons, and they have since closed down and gone. Really interesting now, if you actually go to coinhive.com, I promise it's safe, A fellow cybersecurity researcher called Troy Hunt now actually owns that domain. So if you go to coinhive.com, it will redirect you to his post on taking control of that domain and what he now does with it. But this is cryptojacking. You find a way to get your JavaScript, this library, onto other people's websites, and you make all of their visitors mine cryptocurrency for you. So now we have to remember that this is running on a government website. And I was like, well, I know budgets are tight right now, but I'm pretty sure that this is probably not a decision that they've taken themselves and thought, I know how we can plug the gap in our government budgets. You know, we can enslave all of the British citizens into mining cryptocurrency for us. I'm pretty sure that's not what happened. And remember, you know, this is right in the moments after that somebody had tipped me off to this. So I start investigating because I want to know, like, yes, you know, they're running this Coinhive JavaScript library on their website, but how did it get there? And there's many different avenues that the attackers could have taken to put this there. So I took a bit of an unusual approach at the time. And normally when people tip me off to attacks like this or data breaches or whatever it might be, we will generally investigate them in private and work with the organizations to resolve them. And then eventually they will be publicly disclosed. But I looked at this one and there was a few different things that changed my approach. And as you can see here, I sent a tweet almost immediately. Once I'd confirmed that the attack was actually legitimate, I sent a tweet almost immediately and said, wow, this is really bad. There's a British government website running a malicious JavaScript file. Because me talking about this won't change the attack. It won't put any more people at risk. But what I needed to do, and you know, they don't have a phone number on their website to call them for things like this, was get in touch with somebody at the relevant government department very quickly to say, I don't know where, but you've had a breach. There is malicious JavaScript running in your page right now, and it needs to be removed. So I sent the tweet, and then I continued my investigation. How did it get there? Which of the many different avenues that the attackers could have taken did they use? So I used a variety of different tools online. And I wanted to see, what do people see from other parts of the world? If I look from different IP addresses, if I look from different countries, are we all seeing the same thing? Because this could be like a geo-based attack. They might serve different JavaScript to different types of devices. So I used a few different tools online. Number one, to confirm, first of all, they were seeing what I was seeing. But number two, do they see some variation of this attack? Or is this just a carte blanche? Everybody's getting the crypto miner. And it turns out, yes, like everybody was just getting the malicious JavaScript on the page that mines cryptocurrency. And I eventually narrowed down the point of injection, which was a third-party JavaScript library. And I'm pretty sure we all load third-party JavaScript on our pages, right? We have, you know, nowadays, I'm sure it's in the region of many, many scripts, in the tens of scripts potentially. And it was a third-party dependency of theirs that was the original point of the injection. Now, the original point of the injection was a text-to-speech plugin for visually impaired visitors to the website. You could load their JavaScript library. It would give you like a small speaker icon in the top corner of the page, and you could click it and it would read out what was currently in the view. As a government website, they have a slightly higher accessibility requirement than perhaps your typical website, and they were using this text-to-speech plugin. And I was like, okay, so this narrows down the avenue of attack. It wasn't that the government's infrastructure had been hacked. It wasn't a vulnerability in the government's code and the attackers had found a way to inject their malicious JavaScript. It was actually a supply chain attack. So instead of going after the government website, these attackers perhaps thought, well, maybe they have really good cybersecurity and we can't hack them, but they're loading JavaScript from this third party. And if we go over here, perhaps it will be slightly easier to breach their systems. So they breached the systems of the third-party supplier, modified their JavaScript library to include the Coinhive miner, and then of course that's loaded immediately into the government website. But then I thought, well, if this is a third-party supplier and they're providing a text-to-speech plugin, it's probably not just the one website using this, right? If they're a big company, this could be potentially a large number of websites. So first of all, I wanted to tear into the JavaScript itself. So I've got all of the archives of all of the data at the time, so it's easy for me to go back and pull out what we were looking at. So on the left-hand side there, you can see the URL for the script. It's browserloud.com, which was the third-party supplier. And then we go through to their JavaScript file. Now, when I was going through the page, looking at all of the dependencies, looking for any JavaScript that might be responsible for this malicious activity, if you come across a script file and you see a big old chunk of obfuscated JavaScript like this, there's a really high chance that you found the source of the attack. And as soon as I saw this, I stopped looking. In my experience, there are a couple of products out there that use really heavy obfuscation in their JavaScript like this, but generally speaking, once you see something like this, you're like, okay, now I understand where the attack's coming from. So this third party's JavaScript had been modified. Now you can see their original comment at the top, so that is from the supplier, and you can see their original JavaScript down there at the bottom. It starts just here. And this point here is the injection. This is what the attackers had added. And they'd been careful enough to make sure that they didn't impact the legitimate functionality of the script file. So no one would really notice that this had happened because, the little speaker icon didn't disappear. It still worked. So they left all of the intended functionality intact and just injected this little component here. So if we take a slightly closer look at that, as you can see, it's really heavily obfuscated, very, very easy to deobfuscate this and look at precisely what they were doing. So this is all that it did. This is all their injection did. So you can see at the beginning there, we've got a document write to add a new script tag, which is pulling in the Coinhive miner. The second one, you can see further down, we're just setting the configuration for the miner. And then right down there at the bottom, you can see the actual address for the wallet where the cryptocurrency is going to be sent to. And I actually had an interesting conversation. So Andy Greenberg, that was just on the stage before me now, really fascinating talk, if you didn't see that, about how cryptocurrencies can be used for really malicious purposes. And we were having an interesting discussion about how, brazen they can be here and just say, like, this is our wallet address. Like, this is where all of the stolen cryptocurrency that's mined by the victims is going to be sent to. But because of the way that Monero works, and probably one of the reasons that they chose it, is that it's very difficult to do anything with that. So we've got the miner being deployed, we've got the miner being set up, and we know where the crypto is going to be sent to. So this was essentially just their bootstrap. Their injection point was just to bootstrap the files and the configuration they needed to run the miner. And this is it. This will now run on anybody's computer or device, phone, tablet, laptop, that goes to the website loading this script tag. And it is this simple, yet highly, highly effective. Now, the problem was this, and prior to attacks like this starting to happen, all of us will have script tags like this on our site, and nobody really sees any kind of, particular problem with this, right? It's like, okay, well, I've got a script tag, I'm going to declare my source attribute, I've got the URL for the asset, this is pretty standard practice. And of course, this is also going to be on thousands and thousands of other websites as well, as we later discovered. But most people would not look at this and think what I think. I look at this and I see a really dangerous potential avenue for attack. So once I knew what the script tag looked like, it's then easy. I also run a crawler project separately that scans millions of websites every day for security issues. Once I know the string that I'm looking for in the DOM, it's pretty easy to go out there and find other websites that are loading this, that are using this. And I found this on some really, really prominent websites, like the US courts here. Again, all government websites, because of the high accessibility requirements, presumably. So yeah, like US courts, the US Supreme Court, like pretty important websites, now running malicious JavaScript. We then have things like in the UK. So this is the student loan company. So if you're studying in the UK, you go to the student loan company to borrow the necessary money to pay for your studies, and then you work out all of the repayments and everything with them. So the kind of people that use this website are people borrowing, many millions of people borrowing really significant sums of money. Now running malicious JavaScript. We keep going. We have the General Medical Council in the UK, where doctors and nurses are registered. I'm like, well, this website handles a whole bunch of sensitive information, now running malicious JavaScript, and things like the actual NHS, so our National Health Service in the UK, where I could log in and read information about my, past procedures, future appointments, medication, diagnosis, like all of this kind of information available through this website that's now running malicious JavaScript controlled by attackers. And as I said as well in the post, which you can read on my blog that goes into this now in great detail, all across the world, America, the UK, we had European governments, Australia, New Zealand, and the vast, vast majority of those thousands and thousands of sites were government websites. So I was like, okay, well, my original goal was to get in touch with this department at the British government, and now I need to speak to all the governments. It's like how, you know, very suddenly the scope of this changed, and I was like, oh, I'm not really sure I'm equipped, and I wouldn't even know how to begin to try and contact anybody responsible for any of these websites. It's almost an insurmountable task. Now, when we were doing the investigation to try and identify these sites in order to hopefully be able to contact them, I use my crawler fleet. So I have a fleet of crawlers that crawls the web every single day, scanning websites. But you have a really awesome crawler at your disposal as well, called Google. Now, we have a phrase that we use within the security industry called a Google dork. And you can see here, I've got a government crypto dork. So a Google dork is where you craft a specific Google query to try and find a website that's either vulnerable to attack or is possibly vulnerable to attack. So if you can know specifically the kind of things that you're looking for to indicate that a website has a problem, you can just go to Google and be like, hey, show me any website that has this problem, please. And Google's like, here you go, like here's the list of answers. So if you go to this URL in your browsers right now, it will redirect you to Google and it will run the search query right now to return to you a list of sites that are currently running a crypto miner. Because Google obviously searches the page, it looks at the content, and I know specifically what content we're looking for in the page to indicate you're running a crypto miner. So you can go there right now, and it's specifically only looking for government domains. You can just drop the .gov requirement from the URL and just search for any website running a crypto miner. That's a lot. So that's a lot of search results. So this one will specifically only look for government websites that are presently running crypto miners. And I'll bet you still get some results, because every time I look at this, yes, the number gets a little bit smaller as time goes by, but we're like 5 years in, and there's still websites on the list. So perhaps we're not making as much progress as we should be making. Now, the big problem that I had, you know, this happened on a Sunday, so obviously the government's closed, not doing anything, so I definitely wasn't going to be speaking to anybody at the government on a Sunday. I don't know how things work here in Denmark, but you're pretty much not going to speak to anybody in the government on a Sunday back in England. And eventually, because I'd live tweeted this whole kind of investigation, as you saw, finally the government in the UK actually reached out to me. So we have the NCSC in the UK, which is our National Cybersecurity Centre. They're a division of our spy agency at GCHQ, and they are responsible for the protection of like government infrastructure and British infrastructure. And they reach out to me and they're like, hey, could we get your email? And I was like, oh, do you not already have that? Like, surely the one organization that's probably already got my email and doesn't need to ask for it might be the British government spy agency. But, you know, I responded nicely and I was like, yeah, of course. And the general kind of gist was, you know, you've obviously been looking into this for some period of time. There's lots of really useful information in the tweets, but can we open a more direct communication channel so that we can more quickly catch up with kind of, you know, what's going on here and what you found? So I started handing this information over, and I'm continually aware of the fact that obviously, you know, I'm helping the British government now, but that doesn't help any of the other, you know, tens of governments that are impacted by this. So it's still quite a difficult remediation process, but we have to start the remediation process with someone. And eventually I did go down to London. They invited me to go down and meet them. You know, once we had this was all settled, they were like, come down, it'd be great to meet in person. And we did have some really productive conversations with the response to this incident, how we perhaps might respond to future incidents, or, you know, really, hopefully, how we might actually prevent future incidents. Because of course, the thing that we should always take away from incidents like this is, how do we make sure that incidents like this don't happen again? And that turned out to be quite a tricky one, actually. Because we come back to this piece of JavaScript, because to me, this is the issue. And when I look at this, I see a really dangerous potential attack. And most people look at this and think, it's just a script tag, Scott. Like, what are you so worried about? Like, we all have, you know, 24 of these on our website at any given time. Like, what's the big deal? But when I look at this, I kind of see this. And Definitely looking at the age of some of the people in the room, I'm going to have to explain what a check is. And also, you're like a pretty forward-thinking country here, so maybe you ditched these like 100 years ago when we should have. But if you ever wanted to send somebody money before the internet and online banking, you would have a checkbook with like 100 of these in it, and you would take a check out and say, I want to pay, £100 to Scott Helme, and then you would sign it, and then they would give it to me. And then I would like have to take it to the bank, this little piece of paper. I would go to the bank and I would pay it in, and then 5 days later, the money would eventually arrive. It was like a super old school, traditional way of making payments. And my nan, bless her, she still sends me one of these every year at Christmas. And I have to like go to the bank. They're like, hey, I have this piece of paper to initiate a money transfer. And I'm like, this is so cool. And this is what I see when I look at that script tag. But I see a very slight variation of this. I see this one. Now, this is a phrase, and hopefully this kind of like translates over, but this is what we refer to as a blank check. And the kind of implication there is, if you were to take a check out of your checkbook and sign it, and then give it to the other person, leaving the field blank in terms of how much to pay, you might get a surprise when that check gets cashed, right? Because if you give them the freedom to put whatever they want in there, they're going to take a bit of a gamble and think, oh, well, Scott wanted to give me £100, but maybe I put £1,000 because I have a blank check. I have the ability to put in there anything that I want, and it will still be valid. So now if we go back to this script tag, this is what I see. I see a blank check for JavaScript. Because if you think about it, this source attribute really doesn't tell us anything at all. It doesn't tell us what to go and get. You might read the path or the name of the file and think, oh, it's jQuery or something, right? Because it says jQuery right there in the path. But really, all it's telling you is where to go get some JavaScript. It doesn't say what JavaScript. It doesn't say how much JavaScript. It doesn't say what the JavaScript should do. All it says is go here, and there will be some JavaScript, right? And then just fetch it back and run it. It's a blank check for JavaScript. And this is super dangerous. Now, I tried to explain this to the media at the time because this very quickly got picked up by the press in the UK. The BBC were really interested in running a story on this because, I guess it was quite a significant breach. And of course, like there's no journalists here. I don't think Andy's here. Journalists like to kind of like jazz things up a little bit. They like to make things look cooler, especially when it comes to cybercrime and hacks and breaches. They're like, can you wear a hoodie and have some matrix text behind you? I was like, oh, goodness me. So I tried to balance that. I tried to be like, okay, look, we can jazz this up a little bit, but I'm not going to wear sunglasses and gloves while I'm typing at my keyboard, right? Like none of us do that in the security industry. So they made this TV episode to cover this.
It's a crime that's fast becoming the hacker's favorite. And the impact often goes
I can already hear
unseen.
people chuckling. It's just like...
This house looks like
it's so
your
typical.
computer after it's been hijacked. Everything may look fine from the outside, but inside, resources have been ransacked. To add insult to injury, your electricity bill is about to go up, as you pay to power a machine that's now working hard for the criminals.
A friend of mine got in touch with me on the Sunday morning and said, I've just been to the Information Commissioner's Office website, the ICO here in the UK, our data protection body at the government. And he said, my antivirus program has thrown up this warning on the screen. And he said, this is a government website. Can it have a virus on it? So what we discovered was originally that the ICO website was running a crypto miner. So your browser would be hijacked to mine cryptocurrencies for the hackers. After some investigation, what we found was that a third-party supplier that provides them with software had been breached, and they'd included the crypto miner in that.
A third-party app used by the ICO and thousands of other websites had been compromised. The malware told visitors' computers to start mining cryptocurrencies for the bad guys.
And you can see before my system was doing one or two different things, and now the miner is running. The miner is taking 100% of my CPU on this device and using it to mine cryptocurrencies. You can configure a crypto miner in how much of the computer's power it will use. Now, if you're greedy and you take 100%, then someone's computer or phone or tablet will slow down. And you will notice that when you try to do things, it's not responsive, it hangs. What they've done in this case is they'd only configured it to use up to 60% of the power.
Do you like the special effects?
So it would use a lot of it. So again, the average user may never have known that it was there and that it was running.
Scott showed me how they could have stolen visitors' data. So why didn't they?
So what I've set up here is something that the attackers could have done. I've given myself the same level of access they did, and you'll notice that the Information Commissioner's Office website has a username and password field. So if you just go ahead and type something into that field, and already, if you look at the information being sent to my device here,
God. This is coming up on there straight away.
as you type, that is sent in real time to me.
And the attackers in this instance could have done that.
Absolutely, they just chose not to.
Why?
Easy money. You know, attackers will take the low-hanging fruit, they put the crypto miner onto this website and they walk away.
So this was a really kind of important point of the investigation for me. And when I set up that demo there, so basically I was intercepting my own traffic and re-injecting the miner just to simulate it, because obviously by the time we filmed this, it had been fixed. And I was like, well, I'm just injecting arbitrary JavaScript into the page. You know, like, what else can we do? And the answer really is like, I don't know, like how good are you at copying and pasting JavaScript from Stack Overflow? Like, as long as you can think of it and you can get the code to do it, then you can do it. Now, I actually set up a lot of other demos for that interview, and they didn't show any of them on the television because some of them were just far too inappropriate to be on television. But I was like, well, why can't the attackers just use the JavaScript to load like a full screen pornography video? Right? So like you go to the government website and then it's just like, bam, full screen pornography. I was like, well, that's easy to do with JavaScript. And the journalist, Dan Simmons at the time, was just like, wait, they could have done that? And I was like, yeah, of course. You know, if I gave you the ability to inject arbitrary JavaScript into thousands of government websites right now, what would you do? Because I'm not sure that mining cryptocurrency would be at the top of my list. So we did some other ones as well. I put like a mock banner across the top of the page, and it was like the black and yellow slash, you know, kind of like warning banner. And I was like, so I could go to the stock market, I could short like the FTSE 100, and then I could put a big banner at the top of the screen that said like Prime Minister assassinated. And it would be on every single government website that you went to in the UK. So it would be fairly believable. You know, I did some other fun ones. I had the Star Wars theme tune, and I just made the page like slide off into the distance. I was like, we can do that. You know, and the one that I was kind of simulating there, so we have a thing called GovID in the UK, which is like your credentials to log into all of the different government services, and they're adding more and more things as we go. And I was like, well, you know, I can just skim the details right off the page with JavaScript. Like, that's not difficult. Then I can get your GovID account, I can go look at all of your financial data, your tax data. I was like, the possibilities here are endless. And it all came because of that one little script file. Because when you go to the page and your browser sees that script tag, like all bets are off. You have no idea what you're going to get when you pull that resource down. You know, do we all agree here, like bar caching, if we kind of like rule that out for a second, when you go to fetch that JavaScript file, it could change every single time you fetch it, right? Like it could be different literally every single time you load it. There's no reason that it can't be. And this is really the issue, this blank check for JavaScript. Now, the first defense mechanism, when we were talking about how to, you know, remediate this, like the initial remediation, they were focusing on, let's try and get all of the government websites to patch their site and just remove it. And it was like, that's going to take about 5 years right, to get like all of these governments to do change requests and remove the script tag and do all the things. So actually the first couple of days were just drilling into the company to say like, drop your infrastructure, take the file down now, and then that will neutralize the infection. So that was actually like the real first kind of immediate change that we pursued. After that, it's then like, okay, but like we still have all of these other script tags on the page, right? You know, like the exact same thing could just happen with those. So arguably, yes, like, well, we've fixed this one, we've not actually fixed the problem. How do we fix the problem? And I was like, well, do you know what? We already have the solution, right? We actually already have this thing because we knew that this was a problem within the industry, and we've already released a defense mechanism, something called Subresource integrity. So that JavaScript file on your page is a sub-resource of your page. And what we want to do is assure the integrity of that file. We want to make sure that nobody has tampered with that file. And in order to get this protection, to know whether your JavaScript dependencies have been tampered with, all you have to do to your script tag is that. So it's a very, very small change. We've added 2 attributes. And the first one is the important one. So the integrity attribute on this script tag is now a hash that we expect the remote file to match when the browser pulls it down. So now upon observing this script tag, the browser will go fetch that asset, whatever it might be, and it will pull it back and then say, okay, right, but just before we run it, I'm going to hash it and I'm going to compare it to this hash because I want to know if it was the file I was expecting. And now in this scenario where, one day we're loading the legitimate JavaScript and there's no problem, tomorrow we start loading the malicious JavaScript, the browser's going to go, whoa, hang on a minute, this file changed. This wasn't the file I was expecting. Now it can't tell you how it changed or what it's now doing, but it can tell you that the file has been tampered with. And that is enough to know, do you want to run JavaScript that's been tampered with? Because I don't. So the browser will just discard it and not load it at this point. Now the second attribute there, cross-origin, is also required. It basically means that the request for the script file is not allowed to have any cookies on it. So it has to be an anonymous request. And that's it. So, we're talking about this remediation with the government, and there's some of the private companies and people that had reached out as well, because this kind of got a bit of a swell of support at the time. And I'm like, well, we already have the solution. I was like, don't worry, we got it. It's here already. We don't have to deploy something new or create something new. This is standardized in all mainstream browsers. It's been supported for years and years and years now. I was like, all you have to do is add this integrity attribute to your third-party dependencies, and they can no longer compromise you. But there's always a but. So the problem that we had, if we go back to the original script file, and I had it loaded up here earlier, we had obviously the point of injection, those 3 kind of obfuscated blocks in the middle, and they would, have changed the hash of the file. But if I zoom in on the comment at the top up there, you can see that, and this was the original comment from the authors of the library, it says, do not copy or self-host this file. You will not be supported. And it says BrowserLab Plus version 250, and the date it was released. But then if you look at the path and the file name, there's no kind of indication of that versioning within the path or the file name. And this is where the problem started, because if we think about what this script tag actually is, if I change the file name to this, latest.js, we can now kind of understand a little bit of what they're saying, which is, if you come here, you will always get the latest version of the library. And that means it's expected to change. That means that it will change. And this now removes our ability to use SRI, because SRI is saying, I'm going to go here and I'm going to get this file. And then you go there tomorrow and it's like, oh, hey, we updated it. Now it's changed. The SRI check would fail. And we're already speaking to the vendor at this point, and I'm like, this is super problematic if we want to solve this problem, because you're basically requiring that we load dynamic JavaScript from you. And that's just not something that we can allow now. And this conversation I had separately much time later, but basically the kind of decision now is, for the websites that are using this script file, you can't use SRI. And the vendor's like, yes, but if we release a new version with a new feature, you get that new version, you get that new feature. You don't have to change anything on your website, right? Like if we fix a bug, the bug fix gets deployed, you immediately get the bug fix. Like, this is amazing. There's no effort on your side. There's no trouble, right? It's fantastic. It's awesome. We can just, we can patch this library, add new features, fix bugs without your interaction. And I was like, okay, I can't argue with that. It is technically correct. What they're saying is true. And I was like, but let me just spin this around and say the exact same thing that you said, but just in a slightly different way. And I was like, what you're saying, and bearing in mind we had really big issues with how long it would take the government to make a change to their site, even such a small change. They're like, oh, we need a change request and approval and process. And I'm like, but now we have this third-party vendor that can just push a code change straight into production without your knowledge, authorization, testing, no process, no approval. They're just like, wham, straight into production, deploy. And I'm like, so why do we have all of this process for strict change control? But then this third-party vendor is just like, YOLO JavaScript in production. It's like, well, these two things are not adding up for me here. So I was like, the problem now is that, yes, that update, with new features or bug fixes could also be malware or ransomware or cryptojacking, right? So we have to add that to the pile of potential new features of this library. And this was the point when people kind of started tipping and they were like, oof, Like, yeah, vendor people, you're right. Bug fixes sound cool. New features sound cool. Ransomware, not so much. Cryptojacking, not so much. So, this is the problem. Like the attacker, and I've changed the slide there, it's like very subtle. So it's like the vendor, we can patch the JavaScript anytime. The attacker, we can patch the JavaScript anytime. I'm like, right, but like both of those parties have the same power now. So the ultimatum was given to the vendor because their big concern, and this came from like private conversations, but their big concern was if they move away from the latest .js model, they have to support all the versions and they have to support all the features and then they have to do planned deprecations. And I'm like, oh, like boo-hoo, like, come on, like this is part of your job. And they're like, yeah, but if we give you the version path, we have to support the things and do this stuff. And I'm like, then don't be a vendor. Like, but this is the way that it's going. You need to give us a version path so that we can lock to it with SRI and say, we want version 3.2.0. And when we go here, we will always get version 3.2.0. The alternative is you're going to get ripped off all of these government sites, because the one thing that was really interesting that the government was like, this cannot happen again, right? This is like super embarrassing, potentially really damaging. We got so lucky that all they did was mine cryptocurrency. I was like, can you imagine if they did any of the other things that I had in my demos? Like that would have been potentially catastrophic. So it's like, it's bad enough that it happened the first time. We got a little bit lucky, but this cannot happen again. Like we have to SRI this asset. We cannot just have this ability for a vendor to load arbitrary JavaScript into our sites. So finally, the vendor caved. It was like, either lose all of your customers or give us version paths. And now if you go look at any of the government websites that I showed you earlier, you'll see that they are all now referencing a version in a path with an SRI attribute in the script tag. But there are still some cases where this is not possible. And actually, I was speaking to a fellow speaker from yesterday, last night, and he also came up with another example. So my common reference is things like stripe.js. If you're using the Stripe JavaScript, they're constantly updating that like day by day, and you can't SRI to it. And the example Sebastian came up with was HubSpot.js as well. They have the same problem. They're constantly amending this script file. But there are still, even in those scenarios where sometimes you just cannot use SRI, there are still other defense mechanisms built into the browser that can save you. And the next one is called Content Security Policy. Again, supported by all mainstream browsers. It's been there since like 2014, I think. You can double check me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was 2014. So it's been there for quite a while. And Content Security Policy is another defense mechanism that you can leverage to protect yourselves from attacks exactly like this one. Now, Content Security Policy is just a HTTP response header. So you can see it there nestled in the middle alongside other HTTP response headers that you're probably familiar with. So you declare something like this, the Content Security Policy header. And I'm going to zoom in on the content of that header for you, because this is the actual Content Security Policy. Now, the idea of Content Security Policy is you can define what should happen on my page, what should be on my page. And you can see here, by default, I'm saying it's acceptable to load content from self. Self means your own site. So you're like, okay, you know what, by default, you can load stuff from the place that you got the page from. That should be safe. But then we're getting a bit more specific with the script source. Where do you load JavaScript from on your page? It's like, well, I load JavaScript from myself, maybe self-host some stuff, and I also have this external dependency called browserloud.com. And it's not just about where things are loaded from. You can also control where data is sent to. So things like the connect source controls like where can you send XHRs. We have form action to control where can forms send data to. So you can control assets in and data out. And with such a simple policy like this, a typical content security policy will be a bit more complex. But with a typical policy like this, first of all, we would have completely neutralized this attack. Because yes, you're loading the compromised JavaScript from BrowserLoud, but when they load it, it's just the bootstrap to start pulling all of their assets from Coinhive. So the browser would look at that and say, okay, well, we can load the BrowserLoud JavaScript because it's on the list. But then when it tries to load this other JavaScript from coinhive.com, it would go, no, that's not on the list. See you later. Now, even if, and then some people say, but they could have taken the content of the Coinhive library and put it in the BrowserLoud file, so it would still load. And you'd be right. But then that JavaScript's still got to send data somewhere. And that's when we'd hit the second roadblock, which is the connect source. When it tries to start sending data to these other domains that are not on the list, that's going to be neutralized in the page, and it will not be allowed to communicate. So there's lots of different ways that we can try and tackle this problem. And the great thing is, this is native functionality in the browser. You don't have to deploy any, server-side agent or any JavaScript library on the page. The problem is JavaScript. The solution is not more JavaScript. and this is built into the browser, native functionality. And the final piece of the puzzle is that you can actually ask the browser to call back to you when it finds something in the page that shouldn't be there. So you say to the browser, look, this is what should happen on my page. And if something happens, what we refer to as a violation of the policy, you can ask it to send you a violation report, and you can give it the address and say, I want you to send it here. And that's all that you have to do. And then if the browser loads this page and it's like, hey, what's this coinhive.com JavaScript? The browser will start calling back to you and saying, I just loaded your page. You told me this should happen, but this other thing also happened. Is that right? Now, if you're worried about CSP, because you might be kind of starting to sense, I could break my website with this if I accidentally block legitimate JavaScript, we have a different variation of the header called report only, which is a perfectly safe test mode. So you can deploy this. It won't break a single thing, but it will tell you, this is what I would have done, right? So it's like a completely safe test mode. And you will still get those reports sent to that endpoint. And they're just a really simple little piece of JSON with all of the pertinent information. Okay, I came to your site. This is the page that I was on. This is the thing that I blocked. It will give you a copy of the original policy further down to say, this is the policy that you gave me to work with. So I could look at all of this right now and be like, okay, yeah, so either we've just added a new dependency, and this is expected. We have a new JavaScript dependency, or we have a new JavaScript dependency and it wasn't expected. It's not supposed to be here. So as soon as you start receiving these reports, you either need to go update your policy to add your new dependency, or you need to call incident response in because you've had some kind of breach somewhere. There's only two outcomes for this, but now you know about it. Same thing with the connect source. If your website starts sending data to a brand new place that you've never sent data to, either you've got some new functionality and it's all good, or you have a really big problem that you need to go and investigate. And all of this comes natively from the browser. There's no software, there's no licenses, there's no agents or code. You send that response header and the browser does everything that I've just said. And that's in every mainstream browser and has been for a really long time. Now, this, obviously the main kind of defense from content security policy is this, you end up with hostile JavaScript in your page. And whilst we don't see cryptojacking so much now, throughout 2021 and 2022, it kind of started to tail off. 2017 and 2018 were like really big years for cryptojacking. They were phenomenally massive. And from kind of like 2014 as well, it was kind of on the ramp. I think it kind of followed the curve of the popularity of cryptocurrency, perhaps. But what attackers realize, because they're always here to make money, is they realize that there's better ways of making money. If I said to you now, I'm going to allow you to inject arbitrary JavaScript into thousands of websites, and I want you to make money with it, could you come up with a better idea? And the answer is probably, I'm not saying you're all evil people, but the answer is probably yes, right? Like you could probably come up with something. And the attackers have shifted their focus now. So there's a new collective that we refer to as Magecart or Magecart. And what they have done now with their evil JavaScript injection capabilities, and I've got a couple of the samples on my website, they're just like 4 or 5 lines of JavaScript that are just a simple keylogger. They drop the keylogger in the background, they don't do anything else, but when users are interacting with the page, typing in data, it's just skimming all of those keystrokes and just firing them off to a drop server on the back end. And what they're focusing on now, and many of the skimmers, if you look at the samples on my site, they will scan the URL to see if they're on a payment page. And the skimmer will only skim if it's on a page that looks like a payment page. So they do a basic regex usually on the URL string. And if it's got some kind of payment reference, they will activate the skimmer. And then as you're sat there typing in your 16-digit card number and your security code and your expiry date, they're all just being fired out of the back. So they've turned them now into, some of the Magecart attacks that we've seen have been the largest theft of card data ever, because they get them onto really popular websites. So Magecart attacks were kind of ramping up as cryptojacking was ramping down. And really all the attackers were doing was changing what they're doing with their evil JavaScript. Now, the 2018 was the really big year for for Magecart, it was enormous. These organizations, especially Ticketmaster and British Airways, I was really kind of heavily involved with those on the UK side of things. These organizations have, like just on the 2018 line, have been hit collectively with hundreds of millions of dollars in fines alone, right? Let alone like the business damage, but just from like privacy regulators. So in the UK, the massive irony, like the ICO fined both of these companies for having malicious JavaScript on their website because they lost people's names and addresses and payment card data, sensitive personal information. So they then obviously don't just get fined by international websites. They don't just get fined by the British regulator, they get fined by the regulators of the countries whose citizens were impacted, which, if you're Ticketmaster or British Airways, is a lot of countries. So now we're getting into the realm of, they were probably not making that much money with the cryptojacking thing because you can't mine that much Monero in CPU, which is all you have access to in JavaScript at the time. So yeah, they've shifted their focus. It's still the exact same attack. They found a way to get JavaScript in your page that shouldn't have been there. The only thing that's changed is what they do with it. All of the previous defense mechanisms still apply. All of these attacks can be broken down into these 3 steps. Somebody somewhere has to have a breach, right? It might be your server and the JavaScript goes in there, it might be a third-party dependency, but some breaches happen somewhere. And of course, we always try and stop at this step, but if it's a third party, there's often not much we can do. The second point is the injection point. They have to get the script in the page. And this is where either SRI or CSP should be able to help you. We're going to try and neutralize it at the point of injection into the page. And then if we can't use SRI on the asset, it's like stripe.js or some vendor that just won't let you have a static version, the final point we can stop this is the exfiltration. Because if you think about it, especially for things like the British Airways breach, if the malicious JavaScript is running in the page, and as you're typing those keys, it's trying to send the data, but all of the outbound requests fail, there's not actually been a data breach, has there? Because the attacker's JavaScript might be running in the page, but if it can't actually steal the data and the data never leaves your browser, we can still neutralize the breach at this final point. So there's 3 distinct avenues there that we can tackle this with. And hopefully, we want to stop it further on the left, but sometimes we end up all the way over to the right. This is something that we refer to in the security industry as defense in depth. We have here 3 very clearly distinct points that we can neutralize attacks like this. And if you implement all of them, you would hope that before, the 4th point would be like data breach. You would hope that on those points before, we could have actually nipped this in the bud and stopped it. So hopefully you can take away that information, content security policy, sub-resource integrity, and put them to good use. They're free, they're built into the browser, they're supported by all of the mainstream clients, and even if the client doesn't support it, it doesn't matter. It will just ignore it and do what it did before. So there is literally no downside to any of this. So I do like to save a little bit of time at the end. I realize we only have a few minutes left, but just in case any questions come through the app, and I also really love to take questions from the room as well.